يلا بسم الله. يعطيكم العافية يا شباب. Continuing on what we talked about last time, خلينا بس نذكركم بشوية أشياء حكينا عنها last time. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, excellent. إذا تتذكروا إحنا بدينا في series in general يعني talking about الapplication تبع the faculty positions. We talked about understanding the faculty position ads. And then we talked about preparing the CV with teaching statement or research statement. اليوم mainly راح تكون discussion عن cover letter, which is يعني I think يعني maybe one of the most important ones that keeps people looking at your application. Although it's short, it's usually a page and a half to 2 pages maximum. But I think it's one of the most important ones of the faculty application package. Now, with the end of today, we will be done talking about the preparing the package itself. فبعد ما نخلص الدiscussion وكل الأسئلة, we could stop recording and then maybe have a discussion of what you would like to see after this. Do you want to talk about interviews? Do you want to talk about negotiation? Do you want to talk about other things? So at the end, بعد ما نخلص كل الدiscussion وكل الأسئلة إن شاء الله, we will maybe have a short discussion of what is our future plan إن شاء الله. Okay, so let's get going. Just a reminder على الويبسايتس اللي دائما بنبدأ فيهم, just to make sure that we have them on the presentation so we don't forget where to find information about faculty positions in general or announcements. As I mentioned before, we talked about basically preparing a CV, teaching statement, research statement, and then today we will mainly focus on the cover letter. And the cover letter, يعني I kept it to the end لأنه after preparing, يعني to me, I think after you prepare everything else, you should actually start preparing the cover letter. So although it's the first thing that goes into the application, I think it should be the last thing to be prepared. وهذا تقريبا يعني you could think about it just like writing your paper, for example. We write the paper and the last thing we write is actually the abstract مثلا. And I always keep the abstract to the end when I write papers. You want to make sure that you discuss everything first and all the details. And the same thing here. So first thing to read by the committee, first thing to submit, but last thing to be written, I think is maybe a better practice for the cover letter. هلا في عنا إذا تتفرجوا على الفيجر on the right, there is kind of an outline of this of what is a cover letter look like. And by the way, before I forget, a lot of the coming slides are basically from the MIT website. I have the websites at the end of the slides. You'll have 4 or 5 different links that are really, really good. But some of the coming slides are basically modified from this MIT, some of them even quoted from the MIT website. But generally speaking, I'll come back to this figure and the details of how to prepare each one of them. But generally speaking, for a cover letter, we're talking about presenting your qualifications. Mainly, most of the time, we write research and then teaching, especially if you're applying for a university that does a lot of research. If you're applying for a university that is mainly focusing on teaching, you switch them. You basically present the most important information for them first, which is teaching, and then you present the research. So it's basically qualifications, a little bit about your background, and then future plans for research, and then for teaching the same thing. What is your teaching experience? And then a couple of sentences about future teaching, or what would you like to teach in the future. Now, few things about, I'm going to talk about maybe 3-4 slides about what is in the cover letter, and then we'll take a sideway, talk a little bit more, and then we'll go through the examples similar to what we've done previously. So let's take a look at the general thing. Again, the cover letter is the first thing that the search committee, again, just to make sure, we refer to the search committee because faculty positions, when you apply, there is a search committee, usually 6 to 8 people that read all the applications, or at least most of them. And with the experience with search committees, most people start reading the cover letter. If the cover letter doesn't look good, they don't continue. So first impression really matters in this case. It is the first impression about you. If the cover letter doesn't look organized, have spelling mistakes, you're done. People are not going to look at the application after that. So it gives a first impression, and that really first impression counts. And remember that in a lot of cases, it also gives, it's the first introduction to the committee itself, especially that a lot of times, if the committee members, if you don't present at conferences or you've never met any one of them, they don't know you personally. So they don't have any idea who you are. So this is basically the introduction, your introduction to them. And again, as we will see, the cover letter has information that is already mentioned in the CV, the research statement, the teaching statement, but it's concise, it is summarized, you're just highlighting the most important thing and telling them a little bit about your vision, basically. So another thing, that the last point on this slide is you want to write it in a way that you want the committee to keep reading. You don't want to write it in a way that it's boring, they get bored from the first couple of sentences and then just don't keep going. So you want to kind of keep them excited as they're reading the cover letter. As I mentioned, I personally think this is the most important part of the application. If they like your cover letter, they will go into the application. If they don't like the cover letter, the application is done. Okay. Few things, and we talked about that before, and that's what I was trying to say in that kind of first sentence in here. You want to know what the search committee is looking for. So, and this comes from a few things that we have to do. One is we need to read that ad very, very carefully. Sometimes they mention specific research areas, specific classes, specific research initiatives, specific things that are happening in the department or in the college. Those are things that have to show up, that you know what you're talking about in that cover letter. Okay, so you want to know what they're looking for. And again, you're maybe applying for, I don't know, 20 positions. If they mention, and each one of these cover letters in general, I believe should be customized to that position. You don't want to send the exact same thing to everyone. Okay. Sometimes they mention research areas. So you don't want to send a general cover letter that does not really mention these research areas, right? So some ads mention specific research areas, and you want to highlight your experience within that research area, and as well as your future plan. Okay. Sometimes they don't mention the research areas, but still you want to basically, if they don't mention the research area, it could be more flexible. You can actually highlight what your experience in general, the way you would like to present it. But again, you also want to keep it exciting to them to keep reading. Now, the last point in here is, I think I mentioned this in the previous slide, that different positions have different information that we should focus on. If it is a tenure track position that they expect you to do research, then we want to actually have maybe half of that cover letter, maybe talk about your previous research, future experience, the future plans, vision of research. So you kind of focus more on research if that's what the university wants you to do. If it is a teaching position and they don't mention research, why should I bother? I'm going to focus mainly on my teaching experience and what I think I will be doing in future for teaching. So you want to make sure that you're also fitting that cover letter to the position you're applying for. Now, a few other things. What is in the cover letter in general? And again, we'll start from here, what's in the cover letter, and go a little bit more specific. And at the end, we'll see a couple of examples. First thing is, who are you? So you're kind of introducing yourself with a sentence or two. I graduated from this school, this department. If your advisor is known, mention the name of the advisor. If people know the advisor, it makes a significant difference. If he or she are known for doing good work, then the search committee would know, yeah, I know this guy, or that person, and he or she always produce very good research. That actually keeps them going. They become more interested. So they want a little bit of information about you. When did you graduate, or when will you be graduating? What is your research or dissertation is about? Future plans, we should include about research, as well as teaching experience. And then within the research plan, within the teaching experience, we want to also indicate that we know what the department is interested in, whether from the ad or from going to the department website and seeing what research they're doing, what research centers they have. I can maybe contribute in that area if the college, for example, is starting a new initiative. You want to mention those things so they know that you kind of did your homework, investigating what the research, what the department is doing, new research centers, college initiatives, sometimes even university level initiatives. And we will see later on is when you explain your future plan also, you also want to use terminology that the funding agencies are using if you're actually applying for a position that is actually for they expect you to do research. Because at the end, if you're, for example, let's give an example. You're in, I don't know, computer science for Nina, since she's the one on the screen at the top, okay? And you see, for example, you take a look at the university and expect that these professors that in that department get, for example, funding from National Science Foundation, just for an example. I would go and see where they're getting that funding from, look up where they got funding from, and see what this program is actually, what area they're funding in. You will find as you're reading some keywords, for example, I don't know, cybersecurity, resiliency of something, whatever it is. So sometimes you find some of these keywords that the funding agencies are looking for, and you want to include them as you're actually preparing your research statement. That gives an indication, and I think it's mentioned later in the slides. One, you know what's kind of happening in your field. You know what is the important research areas in general. And then two, you're speaking the language of the search committee. The search committees at the end, they're faculty members, they're actually applying for these grants. So they know what you're talking about. That gives them an indication that not only you just applying, but you also know where you're getting the funding and what area you're going to be working on. So you did your homework, you're kind of familiar of the research environment. So that impression is always important versus if somebody never mentioned any of that stuff, it's just kind of a general application. So you put yourself ahead when you mention some of these information. And again, you also want to indicate, as I mentioned, knowing what is the department, new initiatives in the department, college, or the university, research centers, what they do. And then you can see or try to present why you're a good fit for that position. For example, people are working on this area and this area, but nobody is actually working in your area where you can actually collaborate with different people within the department. That's always important. Again, you've done your homework. That tells them you have a vision for your research too. So it gives them that impression. I know it's a lot of information, but we'll go through it one by one later on. Again, how do we know that we have a successful kind of, I'm not sure if we should call it a successful cover letter, but generally a good cover letter, that one is you already present your research accomplishments, define what is your vision of research and the impact of that research especially. And then the next one, which is really important, and that's why I was trying to mention some of these tips, is differentiate yourself from other applicants. Remember, in some positions, for example, in our department in civil engineering at Lehigh, we get 200, 250 applicants. Do I have time to read all of them? No. I'll read the cover letter. If it looks good, you're on pile A. Let's call it group 1, which is we're going to review them in more details. If it doesn't look good, well, then a minute, your application is on pile B. You're gone, you're done. So we need to make sure that how do I differentiate myself within this 100 or 200 people? And that's what we're talking about. One, teaching experience, teaching evaluations, for example, any grant, any fellowships that you got, any awards or recognition from the department or the college, letting people know that you have an experience, for example, whether it's practical, writing publications, helping with conferences, presenting at conferences, writing research grants. All of those are things that differentiate you from other applicants. So anything that you think, it may not be very significant, but at the end, mentioning it puts you a step ahead of everybody else who did not. Sometimes this is even within the service. You've done a lot of interaction or student organization or national or within campus or international. Those activities also are important too. That tells whoever is reading that we're talking about somebody who also likes to lead other people. Because at the end, as a faculty, you're leading your research group, leading research projects. And you could, some people even think about it as if you're having a small business. Because at the end, you have to get funding, fund those students, make sure the lab is running if you're running like experimental research. And all of the students are supported. And at the same time, they're funded, they can go for your PhD, you're actually advising them. So at the end, you have to have some leadership in there. So even student activities are important in this case to differentiate you from others. And again, for research, you're going to see that establishing a niche of research is important, especially if it matches what the department is looking for. And again, we want to try to show that we're excited as we're writing. So even from the first sentence, I'm excited to contact you or to submit this application for this position. Show them that you're really excited. And then the last thing, you want to make sure all of this is within 1 to 2 pages. The closer it, most of the time I see it 1 to 1.5 pages, for example. Okay, so we need to be concise. And later on in the next few slides, you'll see that I mentioned challenge yourself to make the sentences as short as possible. So you don't have a lot of things that are unnecessary within these sentences, but still deliver the meaning that you want. And that is really sometimes hard. And sometimes it's hard even when writing papers or proposals. But with practice, I think you can get it. So let's take a look now at this outline, as I mentioned. If we take a look at the outline, and again, this is from the MIT website. So if you take a look on the left-hand side, they have basically different letters. For example, A is the letterhead, B is the date, the department, and the university, C, salutations, D is brief introduction, and so on. And then in the kind of the core in the middle there is talking about your achievements, research plans or future plans, as well as teaching and mentorship. By the way, mentorship, if you're working in a lab and you work or some undergraduate students or master students are helping you, that's considered the mentorship because you're actually also a leadership skill. Because working with these students, you're the one who's telling them what to do and when to come and what to do and where to go and whatever, all of that stuff, and teaching them some of these skills. So that's a mentorship as well as actually a leadership skill. Although it could be simple, but again, it shows that you have some of that expertise. So I'm going to start with kind of the top and the bottom, which is kind of the letterhead and introduction and all of that, as well as the closure and the wrap-up at the bottom. And then we'll go through the details of that, which is kind of what you have in the middle in more details. So let's start with, for example, Part A. Part A, you could either have a letterhead that has your university logo or something, but you need to have also your name, contact information, position, email, and maybe a phone number sometimes. Some people actually put, especially with people who have more experience, they put, for example, the Google Scholar. If you have a website, they put also a link for the website. So sometimes that is included in that at the top of the letter. Now for part B, which department you're submitting to, the date, as well as the university and the department you're submitting the application to. And then after that, we start by basically dear somebody, which is most of the time we call it dear search committee or faculty search committee. If it is mentioned in the announcement that, for example, for this position, whatever, contact X, Y, and Z, or whatever department chair, you could actually include the department head. But most of the time, you have, for example, dear faculty search committee or dear chair of search committee. But I think faculty search committee makes it kind of wider because the search committee usually, as I mentioned, 6 to 8 people. So you don't want to only address it to the chair of that search committee. Okay. Now, once we're done with part C, now we're going to go to the bottom of that outline. I, J, and K at the bottom. So for I, basically wrapping up, you just tell them, please let me know if you need any more information or any more documents that need to be submitted. That's basically part I, or wrapping up. If you go to the bottom, which is J, you could basically say just, I look forward to your reply or to hearing from you, whatever, just something to kind of be more professional to close out of that. And then at the end, we need to be professional in the application. Most of the time we use sincerely or regards or something, or best regards or something like that. And then you include your name and signature at the bottom. And again, most of the time now we submit everything in PDF or upload it to a website. So a PDF file that has like a picture of your signature is more than enough in this case. So we basically talked about the top as well as the bottom of that letter. Let's now just, or the cover letter, let's just take a look at what goes in the middle, which is kind of the main or the meat of that cover letter, basically. Okay. 1, the brief introduction. 1, as I mentioned, show excitement. I'm really excited to submit my application to, and state that position, assistant, tenure track assistant professor position in University X department or in department X University Y. Clearly state what position you're applying for. Sometimes, and that's the second sentence at the top there, sometimes there are positions that are not necessarily in one department, but we call them cluster hire or interdisciplinary hires. Okay, those would be, there is a research area, for example, somebody is doing research in this area and another department is doing a research in a different area, but they need somebody to actually bridge between these two different expertise. And a lot of times it happens, for example, in data science, computer engineering, with social sciences and other things. So that those are kind of what we call a cluster hire. If it is, and it's not mentioned within a specific department, again, mention the name of that position. Assistant professor in this. Just mention the name that they have in the ad so they know exactly, and you mention exactly what position you're applying for. That's the introduction. Now we have a couple of, then comes basically the research or achievements in general, let's call them, whether it's research or teaching. The teaching usually, as I mentioned, it comes toward the end there because we're assuming you're applying for a university where you're doing teaching, research. If the teaching is the main thing, you should put that teaching at the top. So we basically say, I have research experience in this area. You highlight, for example, I have this number of publications, presentations, any other things that you think are achievements in your area. And then you talk about your future research. Plan to do this or planning to do that specific research area. Now, if they mention the research areas in the ad and you're actually already working in that area, you could just basically use similar words that are in the ad. If they don't mention any, you just basically want to mention the areas of or your research area that you have been working on. But again, you always want to make sure that really every application, especially the cover letter, and sometimes even the research statement have to kind of be tweaked a little bit, changed, so it fits that position that you're applying for. And one other thing that we mentioned, after you explain your research areas, what you would like to do in the future, maybe how to get funding in the future too, in some areas, and then how is what you want to do is related to what is currently happening at the university level, whether it's in the department, the college, or the university. As I mentioned, if you know they're very well known in that area, they have this research center, they have specific faculty, and as you read those, you could actually think, oh, it would be great to collaborate with this person on this specific area. You don't have to mention the names of the people, but mentioning the areas and collaborate within the department and across the department. And then after you're done with all of that for research and future research and collaboration, you basically need to highlight your research, teaching and mentorship experience, as well as any service, whether it's, as I mentioned, at the university, for your profession, for your community. Some of these things, even student clubs, student organizations, national organizations, anything that you helped organizing a conference, all of this is really good. So let's take a look at kind of more details, a little bit, few more comments, and then we'll go through the examples. So we'll kind of just dig a little bit deeper into some of this. Now, one of the most important things that I believe many of us have that problem is all of us don't like to talk about ourselves. And it is really hard when you're writing about yourself. It is not easy to say, I have this and this and this. It's just a lot of people have just a hard time crossing that. But I think it is also important that you want to show them that you're good, you know what you're doing, because it shows confidence, and that confidence actually gets transferred to people who are reading that statement. And honestly, when I started applying, I always find it difficult for me to write about myself at the beginning. Now I can write paragraphs about myself. It doesn't matter, okay? Because you want to show your confidence. You're basically selling yourself and telling them that I fit that position. But at the beginning, especially as students, we're really shy talking about our achievements and what we do. And maybe some people are thinking, oh yeah, this is just maybe not a big deal. Could be a big deal without us knowing, basically. So we want to make sure that we're really advocating for ourselves before we advocate it for other people or in front of other people. Achievements. Who did you work with, the university you graduated from? Whether we like it or we don't like it, in academia, it does matter. And it matters not because of this X or Y. It matters because a lot of times, highly ranked universities or well-known universities in your area, doesn't have to be in everything, as well as faculty who work on that institution are known. So people who are reading the application or in the search committee, if they are, for example, if you are in a specific area, cybersecurity or whatever, and people who have a couple of people who are on the search committee in that area, and they know your advisor, and they know that your advisor produced good work or outstanding work, for example, you're halfway there. Your application is already on pile A, okay? So those things do matter, okay? If you're working on a research project that is, for example, funded by the National Science Foundation, and the National Science Foundation have a success rate of 5%, maybe 8%. So out of 100 proposals, they fund 5 to 8 proposals. So if I have an NSF project and I hire a student on that NSF project, that basically means that this student is really, really good. Otherwise, I'm not going to get any student to work on a highly challenging project. Does that make sense? So it also, project, if it is funded by like NIH, NSF, Department of Energy, some of these funding agencies, it actually does matter. Maybe mentioning it, you don't want to focus on it, but mentioning it as you speak, as you talk about your research project is good. It shows them that that actually does matter too. Again, publications. We will come back to that on the next couple of slides about the achievements. But at the end, for us in academia, we look at publications, conferences, presentations, something like that. So you need tangible results to refer to. And we will see some of that in the examples of the letters that we'll talk about at the end. Productivity. Again, that's similar to the point that I made just a minute ago. What is the number of publications? In what journals? Quality and impact. Generally speaking, people who are on the search committee in the same area know what is a good journal and what's not a good journal. Okay, so you don't maybe have to mention the journals in the cover letter, but mentioning that as part of my PhD in collaboration with my advisor, I ended up, for example, publishing 6 or 8 papers. That's good enough. They will go to your CV, take a look where they're published, and if they know your advisor, you're publishing in very good journals, again, that's really a big plus for you. Okay. Future research. So based on your research, again, this is one of the things that as students we may not have a lot of experience with it. But my advice is before you start writing your application, you must have read a lot of papers in your research area, for example. Look at what references, for example, based on reading and preparing for your dissertation, you like the work that is done by X and Y professors who are not at your university. Go to their website, see where they're funded from, what area they're working on. That will help you kind of articulate, I want to work in this specific area. Go to these funding agencies where these guys are funded from, those professors are funded from, and see what those organizations are interested in. Usually, just a quick Google search will get you most of these things. But again, faculty applications, and we will see that at the end, it's not something that you can actually prepare in a couple of hours. To me, I think you're talking about days and weeks sometimes, okay? It is really time consuming because you want to present the best, basically, application. And as I mentioned in the last point on this slide, demonstrate expert understanding. What I mean there is if you go to the funding agencies, if you use some of the terminology, the areas they're using, for example, as I mentioned, specific area, resiliency, sustainability, cybersecurity, physical cyber infrastructure, whatever that funding agency mentioned, some of these keywords, sometimes we call them buzzwords in academia. But if that's where the funding is, and you mention some of these words or some of that terminology, that gives the impression that you kind of have some expertise in that area, or you know what you're talking about. You don't want to come across that you don't know where that research area is going. So looking at some of that and mentioning some of these terms or words or kind of niche research areas is important, as well as try to relate some of that to what is happening in the department, the college, and the university, as I mentioned. Now, again, we talked about differentiating yourself from other applicants. Again, your application could be one of 100 or 200 or something like that. How do I make this look good so they can actually put me, let's call it in pile A, where they want to look at more details? And differentiating yourself could be by multiple things, whether it's the research area, the publication, the service that you've done, mentoring students, presentations at conferences, any of that could actually differentiate you from others. Again, we talked about trying to relate, if you take a look at the bottom part there, trying to relate your research aims or vision to what is happening in the department and what are the strengths within that department. And then the last point, not only in the department, but look at other. A lot of universities, most universities have what we call research centers, research institutes. See what other things that they have that you could actually collaborate with people. Again, it gives two things. One, it gives them an impression that you know that you have to collaborate with people, or you need to. You've done your homework, that you looked at the university and the department and the college, and you know what is happening in there. If your application is just general, or if they, not necessarily general, but if they get the feeling that you did not do your homework, again, that's not really a very good sign. Now, if you have any, for example, some people apply after working for the industry or after having some experience. Highlight those experiences and think of how do I make this experience, even if it is not in academia, useful for me in that position. For example, if I worked in the industry, maybe I could use my connections in the industry. One, for teaching, because having somebody who has worked actually improve your teaching skills, you give more practical problems, but also you have connections that could actually end up lead to funding in the future. So kind of try to use that to make it basically look good for your application in general. When you mention funding, some people mention areas or funding agencies. You don't want to mention one funding agency. You want to kind of go beyond than one, just to make sure if you're not successful in one, you may be successful in another one. And again, always modify your application for every university you apply for, because you should kind of modify it a little bit, tweak it a little bit for that ad that you're actually applying for. Okay. Now, one other thing which could be related to how to present the information. You want to make sure that make it easy for the search committee or whoever is reading your, especially the cover letter, make it easy for them to find the information. So talk about research, mention your achievements, maybe you want to highlight a few things, you maybe want to make something that is bold, whatever, but make it easy for them to find what information they're looking for. Okay. And what words should we use? Again, you want to use some verbs that show that you have an impact of your effort. I've led this, developed this, use it, innovations or something. If you say I participated, it gives an indication that it's a passive thing. You just were there and then just ended up participating in something. But if you, for example, led the efforts on anything, on writing a paper or on presenting a paper at a conference or on efforts or even leading or developing something that is for a student club or organization, use some of these words that show these initiative and leadership skills. Okay. And this is maybe the most difficult one, which is the second point, is avoid redundancy. Minimize the number of words, but keep the meaning. And challenge yourself how to make this the sentences as short as possible, but still convey that message. So all of us fall into this. All of us end up writing long sentences that some readers may end up lose track of some of who's basically there and who's reading. If somebody's reading your application, maybe they get lost if you have very long sentences. So minimize the number of words, to the point, and just basically minimize redundancies. Keywords. Again, we talked about this. When you talk about research areas, use the keywords that the funding agencies are using. As I mentioned, they have specific areas, specific research areas or research topics that they want to fund in the future. So use some of these keywords in your cover letter. And again, a short visit to some faculty websites or the funding agencies where some of these faculty got funding can actually teach you a lot about how to write some of that. Okay. Maintain a lot of white space. Sometimes we end up looking at cover letters that people have just didn't want to shorten it and they want to keep it into one page, so they end up not using a lot of margins and using smaller fonts and whatever. You don't want to do that. Make it clear that here is where I'm talking about research, this is where I'm talking about teaching, this is where I'm talking about my future plan. Just it's easier for people to read. And we'll see two examples at the end. I think one of them you will see that it has more white space and it's easier to read. The other one has all the information, but it's actually not as easy to read. But the information is actually there. So make it easier for people to read your application. And then I think the most important thing is take your time to brainstorm, reflect, edit, write. This is really a continuous process. It's not something that I'm going to write this cover letter in 2 hours. It just does not work like that. It needs effort. You need to collect information. You need to read it. You need to have somebody read it for you, somebody who has expertise, and critique it, change it. I've done this to my students. They would send me something and I would just change the whole thing. Okay. And then we read it. I send it to them. They read it, modify it, send it back to me. And again, we do a couple of edits, few times, just to make sure that it reads okay. But also remember that although there is kind of, these are general guidelines, but different areas have also different cultures of how to write this. For example, the most common in maybe science and engineering, 1 to 1.5, maybe maximum 2 pages. If you go to other areas, you could actually get 3-page cover letters, where they actually rely on the cover letter more than other areas. So just keep that in mind. And let's take a look at the 2 examples, and then we'll have the discussion. So let me just share the other 2 examples that we have. I'm going to start with Thomas, the same 2 students that we talked about previously. So here's his cover letter. Name at the top, PhD, which is he already graduated at that time. PE is a professional engineer. You do a test to kind of allow you to practice engineering in the US. That's address and contact information at the top. This is the address or the search committee, whatever included for the position he's applying for. You notice Geotechnical Faculty Search Committee, department, university, city, and basically state. The date is very important when you apply. And again, dear Geotechnical Faculty Search Committee. That's basically how we start. First thing, I'm writing to apply for this. Remember, we said we have to mention what is the position, what department, university. Just to make it very clear, this is very specific for that specific university. And a little bit about his introduction. What is he working? He was working at a company at that point. And then before that, that's where he got his PhD. Okay, mentioning the date, mentioning the name of the advisor, as well as the university. That's the first paragraph. Simple and easy. What I like about this, and you would maybe notice it, is it does actually have, if you take a look at the whole thing, has a good amount of white space. Easy to read, not very long. I would have preferred that he added a little bit more details, especially on the research, but still, it's actually nice. Still looking nice. And what I like about this is what I do also myself, research, teaching, service, clearly telling them where to find the information. He went a little bit beyond 1 page, which is fine, okay? And again, leaving enough spaces between the different paragraphs. So let's take a look at the first paragraph, for example, for the research. So let me just make it bigger. Research, PhD dissertation about this specific area. Notice he didn't write the title of the dissertation, just biogeotechnical engineering. And that's important because this area was really hot at that point, okay? It's a new area. We were just starting working on it. There are other people who worked on it at different universities. Before we started working on it at Lehigh, but it was still an area that has a lot of funding coming into it. It's a new area. So highlighting that was important. It's always a catchphrase for him. And Thomas was really very well organized, outstanding students. He also helped with other research areas. So he also highlighted other things that he worked on that is not part of his dissertation, okay? This is small projects here and there that I have, or a couple of experiments that I want to do to publish a paper. So he actually ended up helping and having his name on those papers too. So again, if you take a look, he ended up producing 8 journal papers. plus other conference papers too. He didn't mention conference papers, but there are actually conference papers too. And notice in here, again, my students who are interested in academic positions, that's why I say always talk to your advisor. Toward the end, when they're close, I get them to work on other research areas, so we kind of, a paper here, a paper there, a few experiments there, so we add more journal papers to their names. They don't have to be lead authors, but their names are on the journal papers. And then I also sometimes have them help me with preparing proposals. He helped me with preparing one of the National Science Foundation proposals that got actually funded. And then after he moved, there was a new idea that we had when he was working on this, on his research. And I also, because of his experience, I got him involved in helping kind of advise the students with some experimental experiments that the student was doing in the lab, even after Thomas left Lehigh. We needed some of his expertise. So he mentioned that he's still helping one of the students. Okay. And one other thing, again, and the next paragraph is a short paragraph of what he would like to do in the future. So this is what he has done. That's basically on the research what he would like to do. If you take a look, he's talking about, again, using some of the bio-mediated, bio-inspired related area. Mentioned, because he worked in other areas, soil structure interaction, he mentioned that he would like to do that. Notice in here, he mentioned sustainable resiliency development. Those are keywords or buzzwords in some of the funding agencies that we actually apply for. So that's why he mentioned them. He mentioned another research area also at the end, and then also look forward to collaborate. The only thing that is missing in there, I would have mentioned a few initiatives at the university. This research center, that research center, or mention a couple of departments, other faculty in the civil and environmental engineering department, as well as, for example, since he's working in bio-related application, maybe biology or bioengineering. Some of these things could be also helpful there. But it worked for him, apparently, so that was successful. And then teaching. So again, clearly highlighted. Talks about his teaching experience as a teaching assistant, lab instructor, as well as presentation experience from his speaking at conferences. Again, I do student evaluations for my students, my PhD students, especially the ones who are working in academia. His evaluations were really amazing. Students really loved him. And then work experience and other interaction professionally that helped him in improving his presentation skills, basically, or interacting with the students. Okay. Notice in here, he didn't talk about, I would like to teach X, Y, and Z classes. Those usually we mention in the teaching statement, if you still remember. We talked about that we mentioned more details there. But you could mention one sentence here if you wanted to. Now, service, notice in here that and I go back to this verb. Remember we said, I led this, I developed this. So he actually worked as leading the student, GI is the Geo Institute, which is basically a national institute that we are part of, but there is a student chapter within that institute. So he led basically the student chapter at Lehigh, and he also served as a chair for a national committee that is for student activities, actually. When we go to conferences, usually we organize activities for students at the conferences. So he was actually part of that too. Again, leading a student chapter, chairing a committee, that gives you already, you kind of have leadership skills. You have the initiative to do this. That's why I think these are important. A lot of our students, especially us, people from like, not only in Jordan, but in general, I mean, in the Middle East, we kind of shy away from this. Whether we think, oh, my language is not maybe that great, whatever, I'm a female, or I don't have a good interaction skills or social skills, well, improve them. Just go in there. Nobody's going to laugh at you. Everybody's going actually to appreciate you helping them, because all of this is volunteering. You're not getting paid to do this, but it gives you new skills of interaction, speaking, organization, and gives that impression of basically having a person who's not passive but active, trying to lead some of these activities. And then I look forward at enhancing my professional service at LSU or Louisiana State. And notice in here, thank you for your consideration. Please don't hesitate to contact me for any additional information. And then sincerely and signature, and that's it. So one page, not very long, but it has a lot of information if you think about it. A lot of information that is, you're basically giving them the best things that they should look in your CV. What should they look for? Number of publications, for example, in here was good. Area. Now, once they find that you published that many, they will go and take a look where you published. Most of these were actually in leading journals where he published his work. So that gives an idea about the quality of the work. Again, teaching experience. Student evaluation in that case was important, as well as those professional activities. Mentioning, and I think this is I believe, one of the best experiences you could have that is beyond, that differentiates you from other students, which is helping your advisor writing proposals. Mention it to your advisor. If you think you're kind of close to graduation, you're done with most of your work, you're just writing your dissertation or thesis and have few things to do, you don't want to mention it at the beginning because you still have a lot of work to do to graduate. But mentioning toward the end, I'm interested in helping you with some like proposal writing to get some of those skills in. I usually get students who are interested in academic positions to help, but I mention it to them simple and easy. If you don't want to help, I'm fine. I can write the proposal myself. But if you are interested in helping and gaining that experience, I'll be happy. And again, it takes actually some time from me, because when they write something, I actually read it, sit down with them and tell them, when we write proposals, here is the way you should rephrase this. Here is the way we should actually mention this. So it's not really just a short paragraph and that's it. You also want to show them how to write some of these things, especially in proposals. So again, that's an example. And the things that I like here is how organized it is. It clearly shows where to find the information about research, teaching, and clearly separates your research experience from your future plan. Okay, and again, it goes through the structure that we talked about. Now let's take a look at the second one. The second one has kind of a different format at the top, but it's actually nicely formatted at the top. So here is Sean's contact information. It mentions his name and cover letter basically at the top. And then address of the university. Maybe he removed the department because of space issues. If you notice in here, again, dear members of the search committee, I'm writing to express my keen interest in, and you mentioned the position. And then I earned my PhD in this from Lehigh, advisor, and in this case, he mentioned the title. Maybe he mentioned the title because there was maybe this is the area they're interested in that ad. I don't remember now actually, but he mentioned the title. And then currently working as a postdoc in a different research area. So he already presented his research areas, okay? And then I believe I can strongly contribute to that. You see, although this could be, it kind of shows that he's excited about what he's actually talking about, okay? And then talks a little bit about teaching, but notice he did not really highlight where is teaching, where is research. So I think the first one has better organization in general because it highlights here is the research, here is the teaching, here is the service. Here it's kind of all together. But also another thing to notice here, and I'm not sure if that's because of the ad, I don't remember now. But notice after the introduction, he talked about teaching before talking about more about research. Maybe because the university is expected him to do more teaching than research. I think he still does actually a lot of research, but maybe that's why. But he talked about teaching experience, what classes he helped with before, and then I found teaching to be motivating, enjoyable, whatever, all of this. I think most probably because they want him to basically teach. They specifically mention teaching. And then I look forward for the opportunity not only to teach existing classes, but to develop new classes. Again, it shows somebody who's not only coming to teach a couple of classes, but excited about developing new classes too. So that's good. And then about research experience. If you notice, he talks about different research areas, what his research areas are, and then as an assistant professor, I would aim to. So now started talking about future research. Okay. The other thing he talked about here is about him being a professional engineer, basically, which is licensed to experience because of his practical experience, although most of his practical experience was actually in China, not in the US. Field experience, maybe that ad talks about field-related applications or field experience, okay, and instrumentation. And he basically talked a little bit more about other activities. Now, one thing that I believe Sean maybe did not mention in here, he actually also did national activities with the same organization and the same student club. After Thomas graduated, this Geo Institute student club was actually led by Sean, but he didn't mention it in here. I think it would, I like actually mentioning it actually help you, it doesn't hurt you, and I think it's better to mention it. And then at the end, I'm very excited again to apply. I'm enclosing my CV. I think this kind of a closure in here is actually better than the first one because it tells them that I'm including my CV. I'm excited about this position, happy to provide more information, look forward to hearing from you soon. So I think this closing statement in there is better than the first one. First one has better when they talked about the service and the leadership on the student organization. And then sincerely and his name. Notice that he cramped everything into one page. That's why maybe he didn't include spaces between paragraphs. But that's the general structure. Again, kind of your contact information, the university, search committee, addressing it to the search committee, short paragraph of introduction, teaching or research, teaching, service, what you have done, and then closing the statement. That's basically the structure of those cover letter. With that,